Tom Bradley had just bought milk for Sophie when the screaming started in the alley beside Murphy's corner store. A woman on the ground, a large man in dark clothes beating her savagely, while a small boy cried, "Mommy! Stop hurting Mommy!" Tom didn't hesitate. "Hey, get away from her!" The attacker kicked the woman one final time in the ribs before fleeing, leaving behind a fake ID card that would later puzzle police. The beaten woman clutched her child, blood streaming from her nose and mouth, her shirt torn. When Tom tried to help, she begged with terrified eyes, "Please don't call police. He'll find us." But Tom had already spotted the dropped ID. John Martinez. The name read, though the photo looked nothing like the man who'd just run away. When he handed over the evidence to Detective Morrison, Tom had no idea that this single card would lead police to uncover a shocking truth about the woman now sleeping in his guest room. Tom's morning had started like every other Tuesday for the past 2 years. The alarm buzzed at 5:45 a.m., giving him just enough time to shower before his 12-hour night shift at St. Mary's Hospital ended. He worked security there, walking empty corridors while Denver slept. It wasn't the engineering job he'd lost during the pandemic, but it paid enough to keep their small apartment and put food on the table for 9-year-old Sophie. 2 years had passed since the drunk driver killed Lisa, but some mornings the grief still hit like a physical blow. Now he did everything: the water glass by Sophie's bed, the packed lunches, the bedtime stories. The drive home gave him time to think about bills or Sophie's upcoming birthday, or whether he should finally take down Lisa's photos. Tom pulled into Murphy's corner store, the same routine for 2 years. Old Murphy barely looked up anymore. They had their dance down to a science. Milk for Sophie's cereal, sometimes candy if she'd done well on a test, always exact change. It was predictable and safe, the kind of morning Tom had built their lives around. But as he walked back to his Honda Civic with Sophie's milk, he heard the sound that would change everything. The woman was young, maybe early 30s, with dark hair matted with blood and a torn purple sweater. She was curled on dirty asphalt, arms wrapped around a boy who couldn't have been more than 5. The child's face was buried in her shoulder, small body shaking with sobs. Standing over them was a man in a black leather jacket, face hidden by a baseball cap. Tom didn't think, he just moved. "Hey, get away from her!" The attacker looked up, and Tom saw middle-aged features, a scarred jaw, eyes with no remorse. The man kicked the woman hard in the ribs and took off running. Tom started to chase him, but the woman's voice stopped him. "Don't," she whispered, struggling to sit up. "Please, just don't follow him." Blood trickled from her nose and mouth, her left eye swelling shut. She held the little boy tighter, murmuring comfort in the universal language of frightened mothers. Tom knelt beside them, knees soaking through on wet pavement. "I'm Tom. Are you hurt? Should I call an ambulance?" The woman shook her head frantically. "No hospitals. No police. Please, if you call them, he'll find us. He always finds us." Something in her voice made Tom pause and really look at her. That's when he spotted the white plastic card lying near a puddle, a driver's license with peeling lamination. "John Martinez." He read aloud. The woman's face went white. "Where did you get that?" She whispered. "Your attacker dropped it." Tom explained. "But this isn't him. Completely different person in the photo." The woman stared at the license like it was a loaded gun. "I don't know anything about that," she said, hands shaking. The little boy looked up with eyes far too old for his face. Tom felt that familiar, protective tug. "What's your name?" he asked gently. She hesitated. Anna Wilson. And this is Danny." The boy pressed closer, clutching her torn sweater. Danny hadn't said a word since the attack, though his eyes tracked every movement with hypervigilance. Tom made a decision that would unravel both their lives. "My car's right here. Let me take you somewhere safe." Anna looked like she wanted to run, but Danny was unsteady and she was swaying from possible concussion. "Just for a little while," she said finally, "until I can think clearly." Tom helped them to his car, noting how Anna moved carefully, like someone hiding internal injuries. As they walked, she kept looking over her shoulder. The fake ID felt heavy in his pocket. He opened the passenger door for Anna and helped Danny into the back seat, where the child immediately curled up with his thumb in his mouth. Tom had seen Sophie do the same thing after Lisa's funeral. As he started the engine, Anna turned with desperate eyes. "You don't understand what you're getting into. If you help us, you might get hurt too." Tom looked at her, then at Danny in the rearview mirror. "I've got a little girl who lost her mum 2 years ago, and she taught me that sometimes helping someone means taking a risk." He pulled out, driving toward an uncertain future. Anna was silent most of the way, studying him in the mirror like she was deciding if he could be trusted. Danny had fallen asleep, his small body finally relaxing. When they reached Tom's building, Anna hesitated. "I shouldn't bring trouble to your home. Your daughter?" Tom thought of Sophie, probably eating cereal and watching cartoons. "She's strong, and she's seen enough sadness to recognize it without being afraid." Sophie took one look at Anna and Danny and went into caretaker mode, bringing ice for Anna's injuries, finding her softest blanket for Danny, making grilled cheese sandwiches without being asked. Anna watched with wonder, as if she'd forgotten children could be kind without expecting anything in return. "Danny doesn't talk much anymore," Anna explained, while Sophie helped the boy wash his face. "He's been through a lot lately." Tom nodded, remembering Sophie's own silent weeks. "Sometimes not talking feels safest," he said. Anna looked at him with something like gratitude. Later, while both children napped on the couch, Tom and Anna sat drinking coffee. She'd cleaned up, but the bruises were darkening. Tom set the fake ID on the table. "Want to tell me what this is really about?" Anna stared at it for a long time. "That man wasn't trying to rob me. He was looking for someone specific, someone who's supposed to be dead." Tom felt ice form in his stomach. "What kind of trouble are you in?" She looked up with tears she was fighting. "The kind that gets good people hurt. The kind I've been running from for 8 months." Tom thought about Danny's immediate trust of Sophie, about Anna's obvious education despite shabby clothes. Nothing added up, but that made him more certain she needed help. "I'm calling the police," he said, "not to report you, but to report the attack." Anna grabbed his wrist. "If you call them, if they investigate, people will die. Danny will—" She couldn't finish, but Tom saw that desperate parental love he knew from his own mirror. He pulled out his phone anyway and called Detective Morrison from Lisa's accident investigation. "It's Tom Bradley. I need to report an assault, and there's something strange about the evidence." As he gave Morrison details, Anna's face cycled through terror, resignation, and finally something that might have been hope. Morrison arrived an hour later, a rumpled man who'd seen enough violence to recognize the real thing. He photographed Anna's injuries, bagged the fake ID, asked gentle questions Anna answered reluctantly. When he left, he promised to call with whatever they found. "That woman's scared of more than her attacker," Morrison told Tom quietly. "Whatever she's running from, it's big." That night, Tom gave Anna his bedroom, while Danny curled beside her on the king-size bed that had felt empty since Lisa died. He lay on the couch listening to strangers in his home. Anna's restless movements, Danny's occasional whimpers, whispered comfort in return. Near dawn, Tom found Anna making coffee with practiced quiet. "Couldn't sleep," she said. "I keep expecting him to find us." Tom accepted the cup, noting she'd made it exactly how he liked it. "Who is him?" Anna was quiet for so long Tom thought she wouldn't answer. Someone who thinks he owns me. Someone who doesn't accept that people can choose to leave. Tom thought about the fake ID, Danny's silence, Anna's hypervigilance. "What's your real name?" She looked at him, weighing trust against danger. "I can't tell you that. Not yet. But helping us might be the most dangerous thing you've ever done." 3 days later, Detective Morrison called with news that would shatter everything Tom thought he knew about the woman teaching Sophie to braid friendship bracelets. The phone rang while Tom was making pancakes, their new Tuesday tradition. Danny sat coloring with concentrated determination while Anna helped Sophie measure ingredients. For 3 days, they'd fallen into this domestic routine that felt foreign yet natural. "Tom Bradley," he answered, phone tucked between shoulder and ear. Morrison's voice was tight. "Tom, I need you to sit down. We got results on that fake ID, and there's something about your houseguest that changes everything." Tom glanced at Anna, who was showing Sophie how to make perfect circles in batter. "She's right here, Morrison. Can this wait?" "No, it can't," Morrison said with urgency that might have been fear. "The woman you know as Anna Wilson doesn't exist. No record anywhere. But the fake ID led us to a missing person case from 8 months ago." Morrison paused. "A woman named Dr. Elena Martinez, cardiac surgeon at Denver General, disappeared in a house fire that supposedly killed her. Except now we think she might not be dead, and might be making pancakes in your kitchen." Anna had gone completely still, measuring cup frozen in her hands. Sophie kept chattering about chocolate chips, oblivious. Danny looked between adults with hypervigilance, then quietly slipped under the table. Tom hung up with unsteady hands. "Elena," he said quietly. She looked at him with no surprise, only resignation. "Detective Morrison is coming over with questions about Dr. Elena Martinez and a house fire 8 months ago." The measuring cup slipped, shattering against the floor. Sophie jumped back, startled. Danny scrambled further under the table with practiced efficiency. Elena knelt to pick up ceramic pieces. "I suppose it was always going to end this way," she said calmly. "I just hoped we'd have more time." Sophie looked confused. "Mom, Anna, what's wrong? Why is Danny hiding?" Tom crouched beside Elena, helping gather broken pieces. "Sophie, honey, take Danny to your room and put on a movie. The grown-ups need to talk." His daughter looked like she wanted to argue but obeyed. Alone with the wreckage, Tom looked at the woman he'd been falling in love with. "Dr. Elena Martinez," he said. It wasn't a question. Elena nodded. "Cardiac surgeon supposed to have died in a house fire 8 months ago." She straightened, shoulders square despite bruises. "Who were you running from?" "My husband," she said, the word like poison. "Richard Hayes, owns Hayes Technologies, has more money than most countries, and doesn't believe women can leave marriages." Tom felt something cold settle in his chest. Elena continued with clinical detachment. "When I tried to divorce him legally, he put me in the hospital and said the next time would be worse. So I faked my death, burned down our house with dental records and DNA evidence scattered where my bedroom would have been." She looked toward Sophie's room. "It took months of planning and should have been foolproof, but Richard hired very expensive, very thorough private investigators who don't give up easily." The pieces clicked together. "The man who attacked you was working for your husband." Elena nodded grimly. "Detective Rivera specializes in finding people who don't want to be found." Tom stood, walking to the window to study the street with new eyes. "How dangerous is your husband?" Elena joined him. "Richard isn't just wealthy. He's connected to law enforcement, politics, courts. When he decides he wants something, he doesn't stop until he gets it. And he's decided Danny and I belong to him like misplaced property." Before Tom could respond, there was authoritative knocking. "Police," Morrison called. "Tom, open up." Elena closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. Whatever happens, the past 3 days have been the first time in 8 months I've felt safe enough to remember who I used to be. Morrison entered with 2 uniforms, all wearing serious expressions. We need to talk to Anna Wilson, or Elena Martinez, or whoever she is. Elena straightened, transforming from frightened refugee to someone who looked capable of heart surgery. I'm Dr. Elena Martinez, she said clearly. And yes, I faked my death 8 months ago to escape my abusive husband. Morrison studied her with cop eyes trained to distinguish truth from deception. What followed was 2 hours of careful questions about Richard Hayes's escalating violence, her failed legal attempts to leave, the private investigator who'd tracked her down despite perfect invisibility. The problem, Morrison said finally, is that faking your death is illegal, even with good reasons, and your husband has lawyers and connections most people can't imagine. Tom felt anger rise. She's covered in bruises. Her 5-year-old hides under tables. What's complicated? Morrison held up a hand. I'm saying Richard Hayes has resources that require us to do this exactly right if we're going to protect Dr. Martinez and her son. Elena looked at Tom apologetically. Richard will use every resource to get Danny back, and he'll destroy anyone in his way. Morrison closed his notebook. You can't stay here. If Hayes's people found you once, they can find you again. Tom stepped forward. What if they can't? What if Elena and Danny stayed here, and we made it look like they left? I'm just a single dad in a 2-bedroom apartment. Nobody's looking for a missing cardiac surgeon in my living room. Morrison and Elena started to object, but Tom continued. Elena, you've been running 8 months, looking over your shoulder, never staying anywhere long enough to feel safe. Maybe it's time to stop running and start fighting back. Elena shook her head. Tom, Richard has resources you can't imagine. Private investigators, lawyers, people who make problems disappear permanently. Then we make sure we're not a problem. Tom said, we make Elena Martinez stay dead while Anna Wilson becomes my girlfriend, helping raise my daughter. The word girlfriend hung between them, loaded with implications. Elena's cheeks flushed despite everything. Morrison looked like he was developing a headache. What you're suggesting is conspiracy to maintain false identity. It's illegal, dangerous, and if Hayes figures it out, could get you all killed. Tom looked toward Sophie's room. 2 years ago, I held my wife's hand while she died because some rich drunk thought laws didn't apply to him. The system didn't protect Lisa, and it won't protect Elena and Danny. Sometimes you make your own justice. Elena stared at Tom with amazement and terror. You would risk everything for people you barely know. Tom thought about the past 3 days. I know Danny draws families with 4 people now. Sophie hasn't had nightmares since you've been here. And you make me remember what it feels like to have someone to come home to. Elena smiled, the first completely unguarded expression he'd seen. Morrison sighed deeply. If I were to hypothetically advise such a plan, you'd hypothetically need real documentation that could withstand Hayes's investigators. Real birth certificates, social security records, employment histories going back years. Elena and Tom stared at Morrison. Are you saying what I think you're saying? The detective shrugged. Sometimes law and justice aren't the same thing. Richard Hayes has made enemies who might help someone he's been terrorizing. After Morrison left, Tom and Elena sat while children played, planning something that could save their family or destroy them. Elena was quiet for a long time. Tom, you need to understand what you'd be taking on. Richard isn't just wealthy, he's genuinely dangerous. When he decides he wants something, he uses fear and intimidation, and sometimes violence designed to send messages. Tom covered her hands with his. I've spent 2 years learning to build a life from nothing. I think I can handle learning to protect something worth keeping. Elena looked at him, something shifting in her expression like a door opening. If we do this, there's no going back. Once Richard realizes we're fighting instead of running, he'll escalate. Things could get very dangerous, including for Sophie." Tom thought about Sophie's laughter, Danny's tentative smile, Eleanor moving through his kitchen like she belonged there. Some things are worth the risk. Some people are worth fighting for. That evening, Elena's phone rang with a blocked number. She answered on speaker. Richard Hayes's voice filled the balcony with cultured smoothness and absolute coldness. "Hello, darling. I see you've been busy making friends and telling stories to local police." His conversational tone made the threat more dangerous than shouting. Elena's voice was steady when she answered. "Richard, I was wondering when you'd call directly instead of sending investigators to beat up women and children." Richard laughed without warmth. "Did you really think you could embarrass me publicly and there wouldn't be consequences? Did you believe marrying some nobody security guard would protect you?" Tom leaned toward the phone. "This is Tom Bradley, and Elena is my wife now, under my protection. Whatever you think you're going to accomplish, you're wrong. Elena and Danny are safe." Richard's laughter was genuinely amused. Ah, the hero. Tom Bradley, 36, widowed father, works night security at St. Mary's, drives a 2006 Honda Civic. Richard's casual recitation of private information felt like violation. Daughter Sophie attends Riverside Elementary, takes the bus home at 3:15 every afternoon. Tom felt ice form as implications sank in. Sophie's safety was his foundation, and this stranger was making calculations involving his daughter. "You know a lot about me, Hayes," Tom said quietly. "But you made one mistake." "And what would that be?" Richard's voice carried amused condescension. "Your mistake was thinking knowing those details would make me more afraid instead of more determined to stop you." Tom stood, pacing to the balcony edge. "You're used to dealing with people who have something to lose, but I already lost everything once, and surviving that makes you very dangerous to people who think fear is their best weapon." The line was quiet as Richard recalculated. "That's inspiring, Tom, but you're still one man with limited resources against someone with unlimited reach and no moral constraints." The line went dead. "Richard only makes calls like that when he's about to do something terrible," Elena said, reaching for her phone. The lights went out all over Denver, sirens wailing in the distance. The power outage lasted 6 hours. By the time electricity returned, Richard had destroyed their support system. FBI agents assigned to Elena's protection were reassigned due to budgetary constraints. Morrison was placed on administrative leave pending investigation into irregularities. The helpful judge recused himself after receiving evidence of conflicts of interest. Most devastating, the custody hearing was moved up to the next morning, with a new judge known for ruling in favor of wealthy fathers. "He did all this in 6 hours," Elena said, voice hollow. "Richard destroyed our entire support system." Tom looked toward the children's room where both kids were sleeping restlessly. "Maybe we should run. Take both kids and leave Denver entirely." Elena shook her head with exhausted determination. "Running didn't work before. Richard has resources we can't match, connections we can't counter, and patience from never being told no. If we run, he'll find us again, and next time there'll be no one left to help." Tom felt despair settling like a heavy blanket. "Then what do we do?" Elena stared out at Denver's skyline, where lights were returning in patterns that weren't accidental. When she spoke, her voice carried clinical detachment from her surgical days. "We do what Richard doesn't expect. We stop playing defense and start offense. We stop reacting and start making our own moves." Tom saw not just the frightened woman from the alley, but the accomplished professional who'd saved lives under pressure. "What are you thinking?" Elena turned with the most dangerous expression he'd ever seen on her face. Richard's made one crucial mistake. He assumes we'll keep fighting by his rules, using his methods. But he's never dealt with opponents willing to remind him that cardiac surgeons have steady hands and sharp knives, and desperate parents will do anything to protect their children. The custody hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. Tom and Elena arrived at 8:30, both carrying small backpacks and wearing calm expressions of people who'd spent the night planning something that would either save their family or destroy them completely. The new judge, Honorable Margaret Crawford, was stern and experienced with high-profile custody disputes involving wealthy families. She listened to Hayes's lawyers present their case. Danny traumatized by fugitive living, Elena demonstrating instability through faking her death, Tom an unsuitable stepfather who'd known the child less than a week before marriage. When Elena's turn came, she stood with quiet dignity. "Your Honor, everything Mr. Hayes's lawyers said is technically correct. I did fake my death, live as a fugitive, marry Tom after 6 days." Judge Crawford leaned forward, not expecting this approach. "Mrs. Bradley, are you conceding your actions were detrimental to your son's welfare?" Elena smiled sadly. "I'm conceding I made the only choices available to a woman whose husband threatened to kill her and her child if she left through legal channels. Sometimes protecting a child requires actions that look irresponsible to people who've never faced that terror." She pulled out a thick folder. "Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence that Richard Hayes has been systematically terrorizing multiple women over the past decade. Recorded phone calls, financial records showing payments for illegal surveillance, testimony from other victims too frightened to come forward until now." Hayes's attorney objected, but Judge Crawford examined the evidence with interest. Elena laid out photographs of her injuries, the fake ID, documentation of Hayes's criminal network. "These relate, because Mr. Hayes isn't seeking custody from paternal love, but as a means of controlling and punishing me." Elena placed a digital recorder on the table. "This is Richard's phone call yesterday evening, making explicit threats against my husband and stepchild. It demonstrates his true motivations." Despite objections about admissibility, Judge Crawford allowed it. Richard's voice filled the courtroom. Smooth, cold, threatening Tom and Sophie, discussing his power to destroy people, with no mention of Danny's welfare. When it ended, silence except for air conditioning hum. Judge Crawford studied Hayes with an unreadable expression. "Mr. Hayes, would you care to explain this recording?" Hayes stood slowly, calculating options. "Your Honor, that recording was made under duress, taken out of context, edited to present my words in the most damaging light." Elena smiled slightly. "The recording is continuous and unedited, as forensic analysis will confirm. It demonstrates exactly why I was forced to fake my death, and why Danny will never be safe in your custody." Judge Crawford was quiet for minutes, studying the evidence. Finally, she looked up with the expression of someone who'd reached a difficult decision. "Mr. Hayes, while I cannot rule on criminal allegations in this courtroom, I can consider evidence bearing on the child's safety and welfare. Based on what I've seen and heard today, I'm denying your petition for emergency custody." Hayes's attorney looked stunned. Judge Crawford cut him off with a freezing look. "What I'm going to do is recognize that Mrs. Bradley took extraordinary steps to protect her child from a genuinely dangerous situation. Her actions, while unconventional, were motivated by legitimate fears." She turned to Elena with respect. "I'm granting you full custody with the condition you continue cooperating with law enforcement. I'm also issuing a restraining order preventing Mr. Hayes from contacting you, your husband, or either child." Elena's knees nearly gave out with relief. Tom caught her arm as the gavel fell. As they gathered their children and prepared to leave, Tom caught Hayes's expression. A man who'd never lost anything and couldn't process the experience. In the courthouse corridor, Hayes spoke quietly as they passed. "This isn't over, Elena. You know it isn't." Elena stopped and faced her ex-husband directly, her children protectively flanked by Tom and herself. You're right, Richard. It's not over. It's just beginning. And this time I'm not running. 3 months later, Richard Hayes was arrested by federal agents on charges of racketeering, witness intimidation, and conspiracy. Elena returned to medicine, opening a clinic in Denver's poorest neighborhood. Danny started kindergarten at Sophie's school, both children thriving in a home where love was stronger than fear. Tom returned to engineering, designing security systems for Elena's clinic and women's shelters. And every morning, he still stopped at Murphy's Corner store for milk, but now bought enough for a family of 4. When he walked to his car, he no longer listened for screams from dark alleys. Some rescues rescue the rescuer just as much as they save the rescued. The fake ID was framed on their mantelpiece, a reminder that the most dangerous lies can lead to the most important truths, and ordinary people can do extraordinary things when love gives them reason to be brave. The arrangement worked better than anyone expected. Richard Sterling visited every weekend, gradually learning how to talk to Victoria about things that didn't involve schedules or expectations. He learned to ask about her dreams, her fears, her favorite foods. He met Connor's teachers and James's neighbors, getting his first real look at how normal families lived and loved. And slowly, carefully, he began to rebuild a relationship with his daughter based on understanding rather than obligation. Victoria bloomed under the attention of 2 fathers, one who'd given her life and another who'd saved it. She kept the name Anna as a middle name, honoring the girl she'd become during her weeks with the Mitchells. Connor officially became her big brother when Richard Sterling surprised everyone by asking James if he'd be willing to share custody of Victoria, making their arrangement permanent. "She needs what you can give her," Sterling told James, "and frankly, so do I." 6 months after pulling a drowning girl from Cedar Falls Lake, James Mitchell stood in his expanded workshop, teaching Victoria and Connor how to build a bookshelf that would hold both Shakespeare and Dr. Seuss, leather-bound classics and comic books, bridging the gap between 2 very different worlds. Richard Sterling had invested in Mitchell Woodworks, turning James's struggling shop into a thriving business that employed 6 local craftsmen. But more importantly, he'd learned that the most valuable things in life couldn't be bought or sold. Connor was 15 now and getting ready for high school, his anger replaced by purpose and pride in his work. He talked about studying business so he could help run the workshop someday, maybe expand it into something bigger. Victoria was 12 and thriving, splitting her time between her father's world of board meetings and charity galas and James's world of sawdust and simple pleasures. She was learning that she could be both, Victoria Sterling and Anna Mitchell, without losing either part of herself. The house that had once echoed with loneliness now rang with laughter and conversation. James still drank his coffee from Sarah's mug every morning, but now he shared the kitchen with 2 kids who fought over the last pancake and debated homework with the intensity of corporate lawyers. Richard Sterling joined them for Sunday dinners, gradually learning to relax his formal facade and enjoy the chaos of family life. Sometimes James caught him looking around their modest dining room with wonder, as if he couldn't believe something so simple could make him so happy. On warm evenings, they all walked down to Cedar Falls Lake, where the ice had long since melted, and families brought their children to skip stones and watch the sunset. Victoria never showed fear of the water that had almost claimed her life. Instead, she seemed drawn to it, like she understood that sometimes the most dangerous places also held the most beautiful possibilities. "I used to think drowning was the worst thing that could happen to someone," she told James one evening, as they watched Connor teach Richard Sterling how to cast a fishing line. "Now I think maybe it's staying on the surface, never going deep enough to find what's really important." The expensive sedan was long gone from beside the lake, replaced by Richard Sterling's visits in a more modest car he'd bought specifically for trips to Cedar Falls. He'd learned to dress down for their weekend visits, trading his $1,000 suits for jeans and flannel shirts that made him look more like a father and less like a corporate photograph. Victoria had taught him that love wasn't a board meeting that could be scheduled or a problem that could be solved with money. It was something that grew in the small moments, in shared meals and bedtime stories, and the simple act of being present for someone who needed you. James often thought about that morning when he'd pulled Victoria from the lake, how he'd believed he was saving a drowning child. He understood now that he'd been drowning too, slowly and silently, in grief and failure and the terrible loneliness of trying to raise a child alone. Victoria hadn't just been rescued that day. She'd done some rescuing of her own, pulling James and Connor out of their isolation and back into the world of the living. Richard Sterling had been drowning too, suffocating in success that meant nothing without someone to share it with. The morning sun streamed through the workshop windows as James watched Victoria and Connor argue good-naturedly about the proper way to measure twice and cut once. Richard Sterling sat nearby, his expensive watch forgotten, as he lost himself in the simple pleasure of sanding a piece of cherry wood until it was smooth as silk. This was what wealth really looked like. James realized. Not the numbers in a bank account or the size of a house, but the richness that came from being surrounded by people who knew your worst qualities and chose to love you anyway. Victoria looked up from her measuring tape and caught James watching them all with the expression of a man who'd won the lottery without buying a ticket. "What are you thinking about, Dad?" she asked. She called both men Dad now, without confusion or favoritism, and James smiled at the question that had become ritual in their house. They all asked it of each other now, this family that had formed itself from the wreckage of loss and loneliness. "I was thinking," James said, "about how sometimes the most important things in life come to us when we're not looking for them. How sometimes what looks like an ending is actually a beginning." Victoria nodded solemnly, understanding more about beginnings and endings than most adults ever would. "Like how I had to lose everything to find out what I really needed," she said, and Connor reached over to ruffle her hair with the casual affection of a brother who'd learned that family wasn't just about blood, but about choice. The bookshelf they were building would hold Victoria's books from both her worlds, leather-bound first editions from her father's library and dog-eared paperbacks from the Cedar Falls Public Library. Connor's science textbooks would sit next to James's woodworking manuals, and Richard Sterling's business biographies would share space with Sarah's collection of poetry that James had finally been able to read again. It was a perfect metaphor for the family they'd become, different pieces fitted together to create something stronger and more beautiful than any of them could have been alone. As the afternoon wore on and the bookshelf took shape under their combined efforts, James thought about the girl he'd pulled from Cedar Falls Lake and the man she'd pulled from his own dark water. Victoria had taught them all that rescue wasn't a one-time event, but an ongoing choice to keep reaching out, keep pulling each other back to safety, keep believing that every ending contained the seeds of a new beginning. Sometimes the most valuable things came disguised as disasters, and sometimes you had to almost lose everything to understand what you'd been looking for all along. The bookshelf was nearly finished when Victoria stepped back to admire their work, sawdust in her hair and pride on her face. "It's perfect," she said, and James had to agree. It wasn't perfect in the way that Richard Sterling's money could buy, flawless and expensive and cold. It was perfect in the way that mattered, made with love, built to last, and big enough to hold all the stories they would create together. Like the family they'd become, it was worth more than money could measure and stronger than any storm that might try to tear it down. That evening, as they celebrated Ruby's achievement with dinner at the nicest restaurant in the neighboring town, Ben realized that he hadn't thought about Sarah in terms of loss and absence for weeks. His wife's memory remained present in their lives, but transformed from source of grief into foundation for gratitude and ongoing love. Isabella had never tried to replace Sarah or compete with her legacy. Instead, she'd helped Ben and Ruby expand their understanding of family to include new forms of love that didn't diminish what came before. The music box Sarah had given him years ago still played its familiar melody each evening at 6 o'clock, but now it served as signal for family dinner rather than reminder of solitary grief. Isabella had learned to cook Sarah's favorite recipes from the handwritten cards tucked into kitchen drawers, not to erase the past, but to honor it while building something new and equally meaningful. Ruby set the table with careful attention to details Isabella had taught her, using Sarah's china on special occasions and everyday dishes with equal reverence for the rituals that made ordinary moments feel significant. As summer approached with its promise of long afternoons and lazy evenings, Ben found himself thinking about the future in ways he hadn't allowed himself to imagine since Sarah's death. Not the desperate planning of someone trying to control outcomes, but the quiet anticipation of someone who'd learned to trust that love could survive loss and grow stronger rather than weaker when shared with people who understood both its power and its fragility. One evening in late June, as they sat on the front porch watching Ruby chase fireflies in the yard, while cricket songs provided soundtrack to the day's gentle ending, Isabella leaned against Ben's shoulder with comfortable intimacy that no longer felt borrowed or temporary. "Thank you," she said quietly, her words almost lost beneath the sounds of summer evening in a small town where extraordinary things happened between ordinary people who were brave enough to recognize love when it appeared in unexpected forms. "For what?" Ben asked, though he thought he knew the answer from the contentment in her voice and the way she'd settled into their life like someone who'd finally found where she belonged after years of searching in places that offered everything except what she actually needed. Isabella was quiet for so long he thought she might have fallen asleep against his shoulder, but then she spoke with the careful precision of someone who'd learned to value words too much to waste them on anything less than truth. "For showing me that family isn't something you're born into or something you lose when people die," she said. "It's something you choose to build with people who love you enough to let you be exactly who you are, even when who you are is complicated and comes with baggage from worlds that don't understand what you need to be happy." Her observation hung in the warm air between them, accompanied by Ruby's delighted laughter as she caught another firefly in cupped palms before releasing it back into the gathering darkness. Ben didn't respond immediately, understanding that some truths were too important to acknowledge with casual words or automatic reassurances. Instead, he tightened his arm around Isabella's shoulders and watched their daughter, because that's what Ruby had become to Isabella, just as Isabella had become the mother Ruby needed. Celebrate the simple magic of summer evening in a place where love had room to grow, in directions none of them could have predicted or planned. The workshop window glowed with warm light from the lamp Ben had left burning over his current project, a rocking chair he was crafting for the covered porch, where they spent most of their evening hours now that the weather was warm enough for sitting outside and watching the world settle into peaceful darkness. Tomorrow would bring its own small challenges and ordinary blessings, but tonight offered the perfect completeness of family dinner and shared stories, of fireflies and cricket songs, and the comfortable silence of people who'd learned to be fully present with each other without needing constant entertainment or distraction. Ruby ran up the porch steps with grass stains on her knees and joy shining in her face, ready to share discoveries about insect behavior and theories about where fireflies went during the day and whether they remembered the children who caught them gently before setting them free. Ben and Isabella made room for her between them on the porch swing, 3 people who'd found each other through circumstances none of them could have engineered, but all of them had learned to treasure as evidence that the universe sometimes arranged itself in favor of love rather than loss, hope rather than resignation, and the kinds of happy endings that grew slowly from daily choices to stay present and keep building something beautiful together. Why Pine Ridge? The question had been eating at him since Webb's visit, since learning that Alexandra's presence in their town hadn't been the accident she'd claimed. Because you were here. The answer was simple and devastating in its honesty. I've been following your career since Seattle. What happened to your wife, how you left firefighting, where you ended up. When I needed to disappear for a while, this seemed like the right place. It was another lie, or maybe the first complete truth she'd told him. Either way, it changed everything. The revelation that she'd come to Pine Ridge specifically because of him recontextualized every interaction they'd shared. The convenient plumbing emergency, the perfect timing of their meetings, her knowledge of emergency protocols. All of it had been orchestrated by someone with the resources to research his background and stage encounters that felt natural. "You played me," he said, and the words tasted like ash. From the very beginning, everything was manipulation. Alexandra turned to face him fully, her blue eyes bright with unshed tears. "It started that way. I won't lie to you anymore, Ethan. I came here because I was curious about the man who'd sacrificed everything to save strangers. But staying, falling in love with you and Zoe, wanting to build something real, that was never part of any plan." Her voice broke slightly on the last words. "I've never been as happy as I was these past few weeks, pretending to be someone who could belong in your world." "You didn't have to pretend." The words came out before he could stop them, carrying more truth than he'd intended to reveal. "The woman who taught Zoe origami and fixed my coffee maker and showed up to help save children, that person was real, regardless of your bank account." Alexandra's smile was sad and beautiful, and full of the kind of regret that came from understanding how completely they'd misunderstood each other. Was she? Because I'm not sure I know the difference between Alexandra Hamilton and Alex from Pine Ridge anymore. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Marcus Webb and his security team. The black SUVs pulled up with the same coordinated precision they'd shown before, but this time Webb emerged with the grim efficiency of someone who'd run out of patience for subtle approaches. He surveyed the scene. Alexandra in tactical gear sitting beside a soot-covered plumber, while media crews captured every moment. And his expression suggested that subtle diplomacy was no longer on the table. "Mrs. Hamilton, this has gone far enough." Webb's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to obedience from people who controlled billion-dollar corporations. "The board has expressed serious concerns about your recent behavior. Your presence here today, putting yourself at risk for a publicity stunt, demonstrates exactly the kind of poor judgment we've been discussing." His dismissal of the rescue as a publicity stunt was calculated to wound, and Ethan felt Alexandra flinch beside him. "It wasn't a publicity stunt," Ethan said, standing to put himself between Webb and Alexandra. "She helped save 4 people, including my daughter. Whatever else is true, that matters." Webb's smile was sharp and cold, the expression of someone who'd been waiting for this exact moment. "Mr. Blake, I'm afraid your opinion is irrelevant here. Miss Hamilton has responsibilities that extend far beyond your small-town concerns. She'll be returning to Seattle immediately for evaluation and treatment." "Treatment for what?" Alexandra's voice was steady, but Ethan could hear the undercurrent of fear. Webb pulled out a tablet and began reading from what was obviously a prepared statement. "The board has voted to invoke the mental health clause in your employment contract. Your recent behavior, abandoning corporate responsibilities, engaging in dangerous activities, forming inappropriate personal relationships, demonstrates a clear pattern of psychological distress requiring professional intervention. The corporate coup was happening in real time, disguised as concern for Alexandra's well-being, but obviously designed to remove her from power while she was vulnerable." Ethan had seen enough workplace politics to recognize a hostile takeover when it wore a psychiatric mask. "You can't just kidnap someone because you don't like their personal choices," he said, though he suspected that someone with Webb's resources probably could do exactly that. "We're not kidnapping anyone," Webb replied with the patient tone of someone explaining simple concepts to a child. Ms. Hamilton will voluntarily submit to evaluation, or the board will be forced to declare her incompetent and assume direct control of her assets. Either way, her association with this situation ends today. The threat was elegantly simple: cooperate or lose everything. It was the kind of choice that wasn't really a choice at all. Alexandra stood slowly, her movements careful and deliberate, like someone approaching a dangerous animal. "How long have you been planning this, Marcus? Since I refused your advice about the Portland acquisition. Since I started asking questions about the defense contracts." Her voice was steady, but Ethan could see her hands shaking slightly. Webb's expression didn't change, but something satisfied flickered in his eyes. "The board simply wants what's best for the company, Ms. Hamilton. Your recent instability has made decisive action necessary." "Give me 24 hours," Alexandra said suddenly. "To wrap up my affairs here, say goodbye properly. Then I'll come back willingly and submit to whatever evaluation you want." Webb considered the request with the calculating expression of someone weighing risks and benefits. 12 hours, and you'll remain under security supervision to ensure your safety." The negotiation was over before it started, the outcome predetermined by superior resources and legal positioning. As Webb's team prepared to leave, Alexandra caught Ethan's arm with desperate intensity. "Take care of yourself and Zoe. Don't let them make you feel guilty for being a hero." The words were clearly meant as goodbye, but they carried an undercurrent that suggested this wasn't over. "What about you?" he asked, though he dreaded the answer. "I'll figure something out. I always do." Her smile was brave and heartbreaking and completely unconvincing. That evening, after the media crews had moved on to other stories and Pine Ridge had returned to its normal quiet rhythm, Ethan sat on his back porch with Zoe beside him. She'd been unusually subdued since the morning's events, processing the reality that the woman who'd become part of their family was about to disappear from their lives. "Is Alex in trouble, Dad?" The question was careful, the way children asked about things they sensed were too complicated for simple answers. "Yeah, kiddo, I think she is." Ethan pulled Zoe closer, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo mixed with the lingering smoke from the school fire. "Sometimes when people have a lot of money and power, other people try to control them. Alex is dealing with that kind of problem right now." It was a simplified explanation, but Zoe was smart enough to understand the basic injustice of the situation. "Can't we help her?" Zoe's voice carried the same determination that had kept her calm during the fire rescue. "I mean, she helped save me today. Doesn't that mean we should help save her?" The question was so perfectly logical, so beautifully simple in its moral clarity, that Ethan felt something shift inside his chest. She was right, of course. Alexandra had risked her life to help save children, including his daughter. The least he could do was try to return the favor. "Maybe we can, kiddo. Let me think about it." But even as he said the words, Ethan wasn't sure what help he could offer against corporate lawyers and security teams with unlimited resources. He was a small-town plumber who'd once been a firefighter. What could someone like him do against people who controlled billion-dollar companies and had the law on their side? The answer came at 3 a.m. when his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. Alexandra's voice was whisper-quiet, obviously trying not to be overheard. "Ethan, I need you to listen carefully. Webb's people are planning something for tomorrow that goes beyond just taking me back to Seattle. They've been embezzling from company pension funds, using my absence to cover their tracks. I have evidence, but I need to get it to the FBI before they can discredit me completely. Where are you?" He was already reaching for his clothes, his mind automatically shifting into emergency response mode. "The Hamilton cabin on Glacier Lake. They think I'm sedated, but I palmed the pills. I've got maybe an hour before they realize I'm not unconscious." Her voice was steady but urgent, the tone of someone operating on borrowed time. "Ethan, you don't have to do this. I got myself into this mess. Zoe's at her friend Sarah's house for a sleepover. I can be there in 40 minutes. The decision felt automatic, like muscle memory from a life when helping people in danger was his job rather than his choice. "What do you need me to do?" Alexandra's relief was audible even through the phone connection. "Just get me to the FBI field office in Missoula. I've got everything we need to put Webb and his people away, but only if I can stay free long enough to deliver it." The drive to Glacier Lake took 35 minutes of careful navigation on mountain roads designed more for scenery than speed. The Hamilton cabin turned out to be a sprawling log structure that probably cost more than most people's houses, set on a private peninsula with helicopter access and enough security equipment to protect a small country. Alexandra was waiting in the tree line, dressed in dark clothes and carrying a backpack that looked like it held more than vacation supplies. "How did you get past the security?" Ethan asked as she slipped into his truck with the fluid movements of someone accustomed to moving quietly in dangerous situations. "I designed most of their systems when I was trying to upgrade company security. Turns out knowing how something works makes it easier to circumvent." Her smile was grim but satisfied, the expression of someone who'd just outmaneuvered people who'd underestimated her capabilities. The drive to Missoula normally took 2 hours, but they made it in 90 minutes of careful driving on back roads that avoided main highways and traffic cameras. Alexandra spent the time on her laptop, compiling evidence files and sending encrypted copies to journalists and federal investigators. "Insurance," she explained when Ethan asked about the multiple transmissions. "If something happens to us, at least the truth will get out." The FBI field office was a nondescript building in downtown Missoula that could have housed any government agency or corporate headquarters. Special Agent Jennifer Torres met them in the parking garage, a woman in her 40s with the kind of alert competence that came from years of dealing with white-collar crime. "Ms. Hamilton, we've been hoping you'd contact us. Your assistant reached out 3 weeks ago with some interesting allegations about financial irregularities at your company. The meeting that followed was a masterclass in federal investigation techniques. Agent Torres and her team went through Alexandra's evidence with the methodical precision of people who'd built careers on attention to detail. Financial records, email communications, recorded phone calls, years of carefully documented proof that Webb and several board members had been systematically looting Hamilton Industries while positioning themselves to take control of the company. This is enough for multiple indictments, Torres said after reviewing the core evidence files. Wire fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, probably RICO charges if we can prove the pattern extends far enough. You've done excellent work documenting this, Ms. Hamilton. Alexandra's relief was obvious, though she tried to maintain the composed facade that probably served her well in boardroom negotiations. What happens now? Now we arrest the people responsible, and you go back to running your company. Torres replied, with the satisfaction of someone who enjoyed taking down financial criminals. We'll coordinate with Seattle PD to execute warrants simultaneously. Webb and his associates will be in custody before they realize what's happening. It was the kind of swift justice that rarely happened in corporate crime cases, made possible by Alexandra's meticulous documentation and willingness to cooperate. The drive back to Pine Ridge felt different than their desperate escape 12 hours earlier. Alexandra was quiet, staring out the window at the Montana landscape she'd grown to love during her brief time as a small-town tourist. What will you do now? Ethan asked as they reached the outskirts of town. Go back to being a billionaire CEO, I suppose. Try to rebuild a company that almost got destroyed by people I trusted. That's not what I meant. He pulled over at the scenic overlook where Pine Ridge spread out below them like a postcard of small-town America. What will you do about us? About this? His gesture encompassed the space between them, the complicated relationship that had survived lies and corporate conspiracies and the kind of dramatic rescues that belonged in movies rather than real life. Alexandra turned to face him fully, her blue eyes serious but hopeful. I was thinking about what Zoe said yesterday, about helping people who helped us. Maybe it's time for Hamilton Industries to open a rural development office. Somewhere in Montana, focused on supporting small towns that need investment but not exploitation. Her smile was tentative but genuine. Of course, that would require someone to run the Montana operations, someone who understands small-town life and emergency management and how to make complicated things simple. Are you offering me a job? The question came out more amused than surprised. After everything they'd been through, the idea of Alexandra trying to solve their relationship problems with corporate solutions was perfectly in character. I'm offering you a partnership, professional and personal, if you're interested. No more lies, no more pretending to be someone else. Just Alexandra and Ethan figuring out how to build something real together. The offer was tempting and terrifying in equal measure. Working with Alexandra would mean leaving his simple life as Pine Ridge's only plumber, stepping into a world of corporate responsibility and public attention that had already proven dangerous. But it would also mean building something meaningful with someone who'd proven she was willing to risk everything for the people she loved. "What about Zoe?" he asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Zoe comes with us, obviously. There are excellent schools in Seattle, or we could arrange for remote learning if she wants to stay in Montana. Whatever works best for her." Alexandra's planning was thorough and thoughtful, the approach of someone who'd learned to consider all stakeholders in any major decision. "I've gotten used to having both of you in my life. I'm not interested in going back to a world where that's not possible." 6 months later, Ethan stood in the main conference room of Hamilton Industries' new Rural Development Division, looking out at the Missoula skyline while reviewing grant applications from small towns across the Mountain West. The Montana office had become everything Alexandra had promised, a way to use corporate resources to support communities that needed help without losing their character. It was meaningful work that combined his emergency management background with Alexandra's business expertise and engineering knowledge. Zoe adapted to their new life with the resilience that had carried her through her mother's death and her father's career change. She split her time between Missoula's advanced STEM programs and weekend trips to Pine Ridge, where she maintained her friendships and her position on the soccer team. Their family had grown and evolved in ways that honored the past while embracing possibilities they'd never imagined when Alexandra was just Alex from out of town. The romantic relationship between Ethan and Alexandra developed slowly, built on the foundation of shared purpose and mutual respect, rather than the dramatic intensity of their first meeting. They worked together during the day and went home to their respective houses in the evening, dating like normal adults rather than characters in an adventure movie. It was ordinary and domestic, and occasionally wonderful in ways that felt sustainable rather than exhausting. On quiet Sunday evenings, when Zoe was doing homework and Alexandra was reading business journals, Ethan sometimes played his harmonica on the back deck of their Missoula house. The music drifted across the neighborhood, mixing with the sounds of normal family life, dinnertime conversations, television programs, children playing in backyards. It was the kind of simple happiness he'd stopped believing was possible after Anna's death, proof that love could indeed be built on honesty and shared purpose rather than rescue and crisis. The harmonica that had once represented guilt and loss had become something else entirely, a bridge between past and future, a reminder that music could heal even the deepest wounds when it was played with patience and hope. Anna would have approved, he thought. She'd always believed that the best way to honor the dead was to keep living, to find new forms of love that didn't diminish what came before, but simply added new melodies to the ongoing song of a life well lived.